So here we are, sharing secrets of the soil with me, your host, Regenerative. Hello, soil lovers, and welcome to another episode. I'm excited because I'm joined by Sam and Florian from FarmLabs. Hello, guys. Welcome to the call.
G'day, Ray. How are you?
I'm excited.
Hi, Ray. How are you going?
I'm good. I'm so excited to dig deep and talk all things soil. So, Sam, tell us a little bit about FarmLab.
Yeah, sure. So, started FarmLab back in 2016, 2017. Off the end of 2016, sort of had the idea off the basis that we thought that if farmers had better soil data and better soil information, they would better manage carbon. And now this probably doesn't necessarily gel all the time, especially not for your listeners here, Ray, because I think a lot of them will naturally care about soil carbon. But we really wanted to, have an impact on, mainstream agriculture and show and influence how much soil carbon factored into things like yield and profitability and other bits and pieces that I'm sure we'll dive into in this conversation. So started in 2016, we've been growing ever since. Florian joined us in about 2018, 19, and I'll hand over to you, Florian. You want to give a bit of background about yourself there?
Hi, my name is Florian. I'm the operation manager from FarmLab, which means basically I'm responsible for everything.
Good.
And I've joined FarmLab in 2019. I have a very, very different background there. I have a master's in political science, and I come from a more communication and digital space. I've never really worked in agriculture. And when I met Sam for the first time and saw his passion around soil and also new ways of doing agriculture and the role that soil can play in that context, I was just very excited and came on board and don't really look back ever since.
I think we need to add that you're by training a political scientist, right, Florian? So,
yes.
And I think this gels really well, Ray, for because soil and carbon especially has become incredibly politicized, and I think there's I think maybe there's a destiny here to be, your fate here, Florian, has been sort of come into the soil carbon offset place and sort of look at this from a political point of view, because as your listeners may know, here in Australia at least, we've had carbon offset markets since like 2012, right? And even prior to then when we were looking at introducing a carbon tax and all these other bits and pieces, a lot of politics happened. Rightly or wrongly, and we kind of postponed or delayed the entire carbon offset market generation. So we're only just starting to see some maturity in some of the markets now, or at least an uptick in the monetization of things like soil carbon, which is a bit of a shame, really, because I think we needed to introduce these incentives sooner, or the sooner you can introduce these incentives to combat things like climate change, the better, right? So I'm sure we'll draw on your political science expertise in a bit more detail, Florian. And I mean, having said that, EU and US are making huge political moves right now around carbon offsets and soil carbon. I was reading today that Biden's just put together put $4 million up for a task force around agricultural carbon markets, which is absolutely fascinating. $4 million, not a whole lot of money, but they're going to be setting some interesting direction in terms of carbon offset markets. So a lot of politics going on right now.
Yeah, and I think that's friendly conversation. And I know there's a lot of confusion, I guess, or uncertainty when it comes to understanding this whole carbon market. And we've done some webinars in the past together, and we've really shed some light into the community about what this carbon market is all about. And even my opinion, when I first saw it, I had a bit of like value mismatch. I'm like, so I'm going to put carbons into my soil, my farmland, and that's going to allow another person to pollute. And I think that's the wrong side of the conversation to focus on, because like that pollution is going to happen anyway. And when we put a price to that pollution, it gives an incentive to drop the amount of pollution. So without a program like this or a carbon market, that no one's asking the right questions. No one's looking into who's doing what and incentivizing them to reduce it. You want to pollute, pay for it. You want to pay less, drop your carbon. So it's kind of a win-win. And it was only until I got curious and started asking the questions, and really grateful that we, have the ability to hang out with great-minded people like yourself and others that can really maybe change my paradigm.
Yeah, this is a great point. And Florian, I'll let you speak in a second, because we debate this all the time in FarmLab. Not debate, we have, some good, robust discussions around this. I think carbon offsets are a fantastic thing. I think there's been a lot of criticism in the news recently, Ray, and your listeners may have read the Conversation article regarding the Wilmot Cattle Co. sale of credits to Microsoft and other bits and pieces. Now, obviously, yes, there's a lot of emphasis on the need to correctly measure soil carbon levels, but I completely agree. I think that if you're interested in doing it or are doing it, and it's only going to be a good thing. But generally, people have the generally speaking, I'm an optimist, and I think people have the best, the best intentions when they enter these projects. Florian, did you want to add to that? I mean, this is an interesting thing, right? Like, entering soil carbon credit projects isn't necessarily always good for the environment.
So I think that it's a very, very interesting discussion. And the carbon offset market exists for quite a while now in Europe. We started in around 2000s to buy carbon credits in order to, emit more, as you just said, Ray. So the market itself existed for a while, but it was not really a market. It was very regulated, but very, and nobody really put any attention to it. Now, when the price of the carbon actually increases, which is really important if we want to decrease emission, right? So we actually put a price on that. The whole carbon market has changed a lot. And now people are actually thinking about new methods of sequestering carbon in different ways. And soil carbon is just one of some more forms to do so. And what I find really interesting around that is that especially coming from Europe, seeing the discussion that is happening in Europe is far behind what's happening here in Australia, in terms of, especially in terms of what people are trying to achieve here. So what I really like about the Australian process so far is that there is uncertainty around those processes. There's uncertainty around the outcome, but instead of discussing it only, they're trying it out, and they're trying to use the process and make it better and make it achievable for everybody in the world, really, and make it transparent as well, which I think is the most crucial part of this, having transparency around this process and having an understanding of what's actually happening there, while at the same time, and this is what you said, Ray, as well, at the same time, we have so many incentives here to increase the carbon soil. And just that's not only carbon credits, right? It's actually the productivity itself. There's so many positive aspects of doing that in the first place that actually adding another layer to this whole idea is just it's incredible smart, but still has, of course, raises a lot of questions that we might be able to discuss to a degree today. But I think the best thing is to start on things and try it out, and be the front line.
This point about transparency, sorry, Ray, I'll just jump in. The point about transparency is really interesting, right? Because the Regen Network deal, the Wilmot Cattle Co. Microsoft Regen Network deal was criticized heavily because of the lack of accuracy in terms of measurements. But the critics were able to identify that because Regen Network was so transparent with what they were doing. And, this is a really wonderful thing. The point of that deal wasn't necessarily to create a system that was potentially flawed and could sell credits. It was actually to stimulate and to get people thinking about new ways of measuring soil carbon, of monitoring it, and of running these projects. Personally, the Sam Duncan view of the world, I'm a big fan of these. I'm a big fan of that because they sort of put themselves out there. They to use a bit of a military analogy here, they stuck their head up out of the parapet. Yep, they're going to attract a few bullets, but at the same time they had to meet that mission. And I think that's a really wonderful thing. And only through transparency are these markets going to evolve and mature, because people are going to be able to look at other projects next door. People are going to be able to see the projects that are successful, maybe the projects that are less successful, and make decisions around whether they want to enter these projects.
Yep. And I think that's really an important point to make, because that's the innovation. That's what's going to start. You know, all of a sudden there's these people talking good, bad, ugly, left side, right side, up, down, inside out, all around. And that's when we start innovating. People go, look at this case model. It could be done better. Awesome. If that never happened, there wouldn't be a reference point of how can it be done better? Well, this was done really good. I'm going to take inspiration from that and move it into our project. You know, Ubers, Airbnb, they were all in the same position. People were like, who the hell is going to sleep in a stranger's house? Now, it's the only way that we book on a fly. You know, who's going to drive in a stranger's car? They're going to kill us. Now we book Ubers over all other transport mediums. So it takes that early adopter to start the change. And kudos to them for putting their head out early and taking some of the bullets to know where they need to go next. You know, that's what excites me about this industry. There's a lot of innovation. And even with myself coming from that tech startup marketing background, we can put a different view on this space. It's not just about yields and inputs and water and hydration and carbon. It's about livelihoods and communities and business models.
Exactly. Now, I'm just going to play devil's advocate, because I think this is going to lead into a really interesting discussion, right? Because I'm sure some of your listeners are listening to this and thinking, you know, crikey, I've been running carbon projects increasing my soil carbon or farming sustainably and holistically for the last 20 odd years. Now these markets appear and I can't get rewarded because I can't change my practices to increase it, right? So, you know, just as some background to enter any of these market-driven soil carbon projects, generally speaking, you need to do something different to what you've done before in order to increase soil carbon. You can't just rely on the climate to do it for you. And that's fantastic for farmers that have had a set stocking rate, you know, or have had very little ground cover for the last 10, 15 years and are maybe about to start to do something, because they have the most to benefit from. But for the farmers that have been maybe farming sustainably for, you know, regeneratively for the past 20, 30 years, the question for them is, well, they've been doing the right thing. Are they being penalized here by not being able to enter into a project? Florian, what are your thoughts here? Because I think you've had a few discussions with some clients that have come across, you know, that have asked this and spoken about this.
Yes, so I did speak to several different farmers coming from very, very different backgrounds. Now, first thing I would like to say in this context here is, I think it is important to put in that incentive anyway, especially for people who want to get into the space now and say, I haven't done the right thing for the last couple of years, but I want to start now. So this is where this really, I think, where this incentive comes to kick in. Now, I just recently talked to a farmer here close to the coast here, a little bit south of Armidale, who has incredibly great soil. And they have done really amazing stuff. We talked about what they have done, and I don't want to go into too many details, but they have done their own composting and like amazing chains of supply chains. There's really, really good stuff that they did. So they have, even compared to their neighbors, really high carbon and soil carbon. And the outcome of the discussion was that I will not recommend for them to go into a carbon project, because they're already and they're already on such a high level that they probably won't be able to really increase that for such a large degree. So I told them to basically don't think about going into a carbon project, but there are other possibilities for people like him to use marketing communities or in general communities, and to include the consumer and also the product distributors in the supply chain, and actually work with them together to then make them visible and to understand that this is how the product was built on. Even if you can still, it still makes sense to measure the difference in the carbon levels over time. However, for these guys, it's not, they can't participate directly into the now current market. As you just said, Sam, it's they will not benefit as much out of this as somebody who has just started to do this thing right now. So
it's almost like benchmarking, right? So
yes.
For these farmers that are already up there, probably won't increase soil carbon much more than what they've got, because for the last 20 years they've been farming regeneratively. Maybe it's a matter of comparing them to the average across the region. This is really interesting. We've had a look at a few averages internally, and certainly some of the farmers we work with, I don't know why, but tend to be the more regenerative farmers, which is fantastic. So clearly we're putting something really good out there. But they're up in the 85% mark as far as, let's say, ground cover, which can be a good indicator of soil carbon levels. So consistently retaining ground cover is one of those things that you just need to do to keep up soil carbon. They'll be at the sort of 85% mark. Now, I reckon there's, exactly as you said, there's a marketing opportunity, either through selling the product, and we've got there's this concept called carbon insetting, right, Ray? So you've got carbon offsetting. So I generate my carbon credits and then I sell that to a company, probably Shell or BP, to continue polluting, right? Yep, okay. But there's also carbon insetting, which can be done less rigorously, but still with some potential. I say less rigorously. Measurements are still taken, but the idea is to take those carbon offsets and sell them as part of the story of the product. So if you're producing sustainable beef, and you've been doing so for the past 20 years, you should be able to sell that as part of your story. And consumers, this is the challenge, right? Consumers just need to be convinced that what they're buying is sustainable and is carbon friendly. Most of the time. And we are seeing some schemes being set up today, some processes that are allowing producers to be able to do that. But I think there's still some challenges around consumer education, marketing and branding to certainly influence consumers. King CSIRO, I mean, you're across the space quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was going to add value to what you just said there as well, is being someone who is, we always refer to ourselves as the glue or the conduit between these different spaces, is the consumer interest in knowing where their food is coming from, who is growing it, and being connected to the values of that story is exponentially growing. And unfortunate to the event of COVID, that has fast-tracked some of the curiosity from buyers and foodies and consumers. So I think that is something that is on the growth. I see models in America with like community-supported agriculture, also CSAs. I just wish that was much more of an embraced model here in Australia, and something that we're working with mentors and experts with in our community to teach soil lovers what is possible, because you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes you just need that aha light bulb moment. And, your story, your farm story, these farmers who have been doing this for so long, there is a lot of other stacked enterprises that they can do on their farm. They could become a case study or a catalyst.
Yes.
Process. They can teach, they can mentor, they can run farm tours, they can sell great quality produce and start building that brand. And that's their reward, not the carbon scheme, So like there's always ways that you can benefit from that. But humans sometimes just go, I can't play, poor me, it's not fair. But it's like, hang on, you're so far ahead from all these other people who are now investing in infrastructure. You could be investing that in marketing and become the host of the people who want to learn stuff.
I think one thing you said there is super important. I think being the use case, being the cases that other people can study and build on is another really, really huge opportunity here to show look, I have done that the past couple of years, and it's possible and it works, and this is the outcome. So yeah, I think that's a huge opportunity as well.
And you know what? If you're already doing it, so I can't. I think Charles Massey. This was quoted to me the other day. Quote originally from Charles Massey was, the most important thing when it comes to farming is the thing between the farmer's ears, right? Like, in terms of convincing them to do the right thing or the wrong thing. And for those farmers that are out there, for those soil lovers that are out there, Ray, that are already doing the right thing, you got to keep in mind that over the other side of the fence, for the farmer that's currently maybe considering a soil carbon project, hasn't entered one yet, and is not farming regeneratively, set stocking rate, et cetera, very traditional. It is, and we see this firsthand, it is so hard to get them across that mental barrier of actually changing their existing practices. And so for your listeners that are already there, sure, it doesn't come with, changing won't come with a financial incentive, but you don't have to change. Like, the change has been, just the biggest barrier to adoption. And exactly as you said, Florian, then you can just continue doing what you're doing, look at the carbon setting, look at branding, all that sort of stuff, and you don't have to change. Whereas for those that have to enter carbon offset projects, the one thing first thing we say to them is, you're going to have to do something different now. And then we never hear back. No, it's not true.
You're joking. That's common though. Changing people's paradigms and getting people to think differently, reading the landscape in a new paradigm that they've never been able to experience is a very hard challenge, and something that we deal with every day, and I hear people's frustration, and it's almost like the whole matrix where we could just plug something in and download a new thought or a new way of looking at it would be really powerful right now, because that is the hardest thing that we all struggle with, is getting people to change and seeing things differently. So if you're someone who is out there already doing this and living this change, we all want to hear that. We want to share your story. We want to amplify what you're doing that inspires new and future generations.
Yeah, and you cannot underestimate the power of just the lack of willingness for people to change, even to do the right thing. It was so interesting. So when I was in the Air Force, I dealt a lot in change management. I worked in logistics for a long period of time, and worked for some of the Hornet squadrons, some of the fighter squadrons, and we underwent a massive. We had a lot of issues with our serviceability, maintainability. This is 10, 15 years ago, long time ago. And we set out on a program of change to change how we were doing maintenance, just to get the smallest thing across the line with some of our workforce. We're dealing with probably 1,000 personnel across the entity we were working in. It took months, if not, probably 2 to 3 years, I think we ran the program for, just to get the slightest changes across the line. Like, human behavior is just one of those, I'm absolutely fascinated by it, because the biggest thing, we have to deal with, none of us are robots, none of us are machines, right? So human psychology is just always at the forefront of every conversation we have, especially today, dealing with farmers and dealing with people's livelihoods. It's, that human behavior side really, it's the first thing you need to manage, and it's in all of us. We're all guilty of this as well. It's
a hard one to crack, and companies have teams that roll out simple changes, across workplaces. So imagine trying to change a whole industry, or the ag, food, or logistics, to accommodate this new way. And we've been talking about regenerative a lot. I'm really curious, because I get a lot of people wanting a definition of regenerative. Sam, what does regenerative mean to you?
Really good question, Ray. This isn't the first time I've been asked this either. This is like something that and I probably always change my answer as well. So don't listen to my previous answers. Look, for me, it's about working with nature to sort of bring back those environmental ecosystems, those natural ecosystems. Agriculture, just by definition, is not it's not a natural process. You know, when we plant stuff in the ground, or we take a bunch of cattle and we put them in an area, like this doesn't really happen in nature. Yeah, we have herds, and there's, you know, a lot of Alan Savory's work is around sort of herd management, but you know, it's still a little bit different to very different to what we do today. So regenerative is kind of moving a step closer to sort of nature, but still getting what we need out of it, because, you know, there's another half of that, you know, that concept there, right? It's not just regenerative, it's regenerative agriculture. And so it's still kind of still doing not the wrong thing, but still, you know, it's like having our cake and eating it too, right? Us as humanity, we need to be able to grow food. So we have to farm, we have to have agriculture. But regenerative brings us back a little bit closer to how things work in the natural environment.
Yeah, I love that. Closing that gap and that bridge. And you're right, the regenerative agriculture is one aspect, you know, and that's the journey that I've gone through. Is it started at ag, but then it went all the way down to the human soul. You know, I feel like we need to be regenerative humans before we can start regenerating soil and planet. You know?
I've heard you say that before, Ray. I love it. I think it's such a beautiful concept. Like, because
you don't wake up one day and have that download. It's a journey. It takes a process. You know?
It is, and we as humans, like, instinctively want sort of immediate responses. And I find when you start to pay a bit more attention to nature and sort of the environment, and you're dealing a bit more with the land, then it becomes it's a very slow process. And but if you can be patient and if you can sort of wait, which is really hard, like, it's in this day and age where you've got Facebook and Twitter and, you know, podcasts, like, you know, an immediate sort of gratification and information on hand, to wait for nature to do its thing is a really hard thing. But as soon as it starts to happen, it just, you know, your eyes light up. Like, I remember we started composting a few years ago, and I mean, you just bought a few bins from Bunnings and just started chucking some stuff in there. And I had a mate who was a guy who I used to work with in the Air Force, who was really into his composting. He had a huge veggie patch in his backyard, and he'd, you know, spread compost out. He'd collect compost throughout the year and spread it out at the beginning of the new year and everything. And so we started doing the same. Took a few tips off him. Anyway, we moved into a new house. The garden bed was completely degraded. Now, just for your listeners, I'm not a farmer. We live on I don't have much land, so the garden bed is probably the equivalent of my paddock, right? But really degraded, really sandy soils. Even did a few soil tests just to see what was going on, and you know, just completely awful. Compost, you know, it took 6 to 12 months to sort of get ready. It took a long time, and I'm just like, oh, this is, you know, I kind of didn't think about it. And then, yeah, all of a sudden, okay, it's ready to go. Spread it across the garden. Nothing happened. It was another sort of six months down the track, sort of 18 months all up. And I actually went back to this bed, and you know, one day I just remember we just planted a bunch of plants. We sort of composted it. I still looked around and dug into the soil, and it was the most, like, you know, the properties, the texture had all changed. It was just kind of, it turned a little bit rich and black. Like, it was no longer hard pan, sort of sandy, you know, dead stuff. It was alive, and it was just, you know, well, you could tell it was alive. I mean, you know, it was, you know, it had just changed, and it was just really like, holy crap! Wow, this is like it's like magic. This is amazing, and it's not magic, of course. You know, it's biology, it's ecology. It's just, you know, it's just what was happening in the ground. You know, it was alive, but it took so long to get there that it wasn't as if it was like, you know, I had some compost, threw it on, and then changed my mind. It was like, you know, 6 months after that, when things started to change and the soil started to change and plants started to grow. It was just, you know, it was really interesting. Like, you know, I think that's that bit of the soul that you sort of spoke about there, Ray, you know, where you kind of start to see it. And back to your Matrix analogy as well, like, you know, I was kind of like, oh wow, I know kung fu. You know, like soil is this actually, you know, this is amazing stuff. Like, you know, implementing this all, you know, this compost that I'd made myself and applied it. It was a beautiful thing. It was
absolutely.
really nice.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's the real life experience. It doesn't have to be in a paddock and a farm and an acreage, and it can start in your own backyard. And that's where the best change happens all the time. Florian, I want to throw to you. What do you think regenerative means?
I think regenerative for me, well, regenerative ag means that we use the natural cycles to and support those natural cycles to use it for, let's say, mass production or a higher amount of production for to generate food. And so so basically supporting the, as you said before, Sam, as well, the natural cycles, and use how nature has designed over 100 of millions of years these amazing turnovers and circles, and use that, but use it in a more maybe sophisticated way to aim for a certain outcome, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's my take on this. And what I like your analogy, Sam, what you said earlier, to break down something that we see to the core. So when we go back to my political science here, so if you look for politics, you have to actually understand human behavior in the first place. So you can't just say, okay, so if you want to understand political decisions, you need to understand how human behaves. So you have to look back into history, but you actually have to look back in psychology and into human behavior. And then you go from there and figure out how humans behave. And this is the same thing, how we can see nature, and the same kind of observe and then act based on your observation, and then don't change everything that you see or make it your own, but use it and adapt yourself into this framework.
I love that. And you spoke about the carbon or cycles, and that triggered a thought in my mind, because carbon is something that cycles. And I think that I would love if we've got, if you'd like to dig a little bit deeper in that and help share with our listeners, the soil lovers, what that carbon cycle is, because I feel like sometimes there's this misconception that we need to draw down as much carbon as we possibly can and trap it there forever. And I've read other reports that say, no, that actually breaks the system, because if you know how carbon cycles, it needs to be moving in and out of things. Can you elaborate on that?
That's a good one. Florian, did you want to start? Do you want?
Yes.
Yeah, go.
You go ahead, Sam.
We're trying to dodge the question here, Ray.
What it means, it's a good one.
so let's talk about the general concept here, and actually maybe we can get into a bit around why soil is, why soil. So yep, we have carbon in 3 places on the Earth. We have it in the atmosphere right now, and I think we're north of 416 parts per million. Probably 420. I'm sure some of your listeners can correct me in the comments. We have soil we have carbon in the soil, and we have carbon in the deep oceans. So, and the ratio to each of those is probably, I think, probably a sixth in the atmosphere, a third in the soils, and the rest in the deep oceans, or something along those lines. So most CO2 is actually sequestered in the deep ocean, but to be quite honest, quite frankly, don't manage the deep ocean. There have been some interesting ideas and technologies that people are looking at now to actually dump CO2 into the deep ocean. Obviously we need to be cautious with the environmental effects that have. So, given we manage, we have most land on the world is managed by humans through agriculture. Soil is a really fundamental lever in terms of reducing and offsetting CO2 emissions. So obviously there's a lot of work, a lot of smart people going into producing sustainable energy, but really what that's doing is reducing the amount we emit. But there's still the need to take out and reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere from 420 parts per million to whatever we were at 150 years ago, 120 years ago, which is probably around less than the 300s the mark, I think 280 before the Industrial Revolution or something along those lines. So there are the 3 pools. Now through growing plants, as we grow the plant, the plant sucks in CO2 out of the atmosphere, pumps it down, creates biomass in the form of roots, in the form of its stalk, et cetera, et cetera. Naturally, that plant would die, sit on the surface of the ground, it would decompose, some of that organic matter would go back to the ground, and essentially you'd have this sort of this closed loop carbon cycle. What happens with traditional agriculture is we go along, we harvest, acres and acres or hectares and hectares of paddocks of wheat. We take away the carbon, so it's no longer going to sit there and decompose and go back into the soil, take it away. And so we have this deficit, we have this net decline in soil carbon subsequently as a result of that. Same thing with cattle, generally speaking, as well. Obviously, you've got the emissions factor there with methane emissions from cattle. So why is it important to manage? Because naturally we would, it would be managed, but because we're taking away the that biomass, taking away that carbon, we're no longer fixing the carbon back into the soil. We're moving it on somewhere else to be manufactured, refined, go into our bodies and come out as emissions, essentially. So yes, so carbon is generally cyclic. So even if when you put carbon into the ground, you have labile, recalcitrant carbon, different forms of carbon. CSIRO here in Australia refer to it as rock and pop, pop and rock. So the stuff that goes back out within the space of a couple of years, and the stuff that gets locked in for a longer period of time. So for us in agriculture, it's about trying to figure out what we can do to we want to maximize the length of time that carbon's in there, but there is this natural cycle where CO2 does come out of the soil just completely naturally as soil biome comes along, chews it up and emits CO2 and methane and whatever else the soil biology does when it's processing it. So yeah, it does have to come out, because if it didn't come out, we wouldn't have soil biology to then fix nitrogen and do a whole bunch of other things. But it's just restoring that balance, I guess. So rather than taking away all of that biomass, how do we bring it back, and what form we bring it back in? In a cropping system versus a grazing system, this is where we can get very technical, like how it's, the way you do that in a cropping system, so you can't just continue to grow the same stalk, the same wheat, it's got to be harvested eventually. So, so how do we put it back, and how do we return it to the soil?
Yeah. And I think you did a great job in explaining that. I think you weren't avoiding the question, and I think knowing how it works means we can manage it better. And that's the real kind of lesson there, is it's not just carbon in the air is the issue, or like carbon in seas is not manageable. It's about knowing how it all works, so we can see the many parts as a whole, and then zoom out and look at it and go, oh, there's opportunity here, and maybe we can, and be mindful and go, if we do this and we take all this harvest away, that breaks the cycle. What are we doing to balance that? I think that's what's really happening at the moment, is we've got a lot more people observing these systems, and even I see impressive stuff with satellite imagery that can see the carbon movement through the planet, and knowing that, okay, America's in this season at the moment, and look at all the carbon exiting and going across the oceans. And, we got better metrics and better data points to manage things better.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think so one thing here. So first of all, I really like your explanation, Sam. I think it was brilliant. I think it's really about putting levels back into the soil. It's not about putting like carbon in general into the soil and leave it there forever, but it's about getting that balance back. That's I think that's the key here, and to change a little bit because we already have kind of changed the circle to a degree in the way we do agriculture, and I think now it's time to get it back, and to long term it will help the soil in general to in other ways as well, not only to sequester carbon, but it's good for the soil. It has increase the biomass, and it protects the soil for erosion as well, which is also a huge problem all over the world. So I think that's just thinking about the balance. And then the other thing is that we do not want to sequester the carbon in the soil forever, right? We don't need to kind of lock it into the soil. We need to get it out of the air. So CO2 lasts in the air for around 100 years. That's why we want to sequester it into the soil for at least a part amount of this, and we don't want to lock it in there forever. There are other methods to bind carbon into I don't know, reservoirs under the earth forever, if you want. But what we do here is really just emphasizing on the circle that we on the carbon cycle that we talked earlier, and to regain more of the balance that actually has happened automatically, and that we as human beings have disturbed over time. And that's the key here.
It's like regenerative humanity, isn't it?
Yes.
Florian.
Yes.
So rather than just saying regenerative agriculture, it's regenerative humanity. I mean, this is a really critical point, because when we look at the cycles of carbon, we're unfortunately not, we're not exactly creating any more coal or oil, right? So these things are coming out of, there's a lot of coal that's come out of the ground and has just been burnt, and CO2 has gone to the atmosphere. Now, we're not growing forests to then, fossilize again and then turn over the course of, hundreds of millions of years into that coal or into that crude oil. So yeah, there's this balance between, so we now have to balance the soil and agriculture and the carbon levels there with carbon in the atmosphere. And I mean, at the end of the day, to be quite honest, the biggest threat we have to humanity, and the reason that I think we need to tackle this right now, and we're tackling, why, we're going to the why now of all of this, but I think it's really important to touch on is climate change. Climate change is going to affect a huge portion of the world's population, and maybe not you and I. We can sit in our lovely cozy houses in a beautiful developed nation. Despite what you might think of our politicians, we have it relatively good here. The challenge is going to be in some of these developing nations where a 1 degree change is going to mean, is going to spell the difference between a crop failure and a crop success, which is then going to mean whether or not basically that family will survive or really urbanize and move to an urban center. What happens when you get mass shifting of populations, or you get wars, you get famines, obviously, with the lack of crops and all these other things. This is primarily and fundamentally why we started FarmLab back in 2016, Ray. And I haven't spoken about this much, but I was deployed to South Sudan with the United Nations in 2012, and part of that was a really eye-opening thing. We were there around about wet season, and we were living in a lovely compound, Australian compound there in the middle of Juba, the capital of South Sudan. All of a sudden wet season came by and the entire place just flooded. There was no real drainage, and there was the Nile River, which was probably the only drain in South Sudan, right? So all the water used to kind of come down the streets and end up in the Nile and sort of flow out to Egypt and the Mediterranean eventually. And we went out, I remember, at first rain, we went outside and we looked sort of around the street, and our neighbors who literally lived in mud huts next door to us had just had their entire place flooded. This is in the middle of the capital of Juba, right? So these guys, so we're there trying to shore up their sort of, their property with sandbags. Water's just streaming through, raw sewage, because, there's no sewage system is kind of coming through as well. It was awful. And, it was these experiences where you're like, okay, this is great, but I'm going to go back to my cozy apartment. I was living in Sydney in Parramatta at the time, put my feet up and have a beer at the end of all of this after six months here. These people are still going to be living in this environment. And hey, this was 2012 at the time. So climate change hadn't really sort of taken off then. There was still climate skeptics. I mean, there still are, but we know they're crazy now, whereas before they were kind of like, oh yeah, okay, people were living with them. So fundamentally, I mean, the reason we need to follow these regenerative principles, and the reason we got into, the reason we started FarmLab to help people get into this, was to get around this, because people, we just saw so much potential, such catastrophic impact on these developing nations, which, mind you, is where 5/7 of the world live, today in nations like that. So, kind of a really big thing, and we all have a big part to play in mitigating climate change and managing soil carbon.
And I think it's great that you've had that kind of physical experience, and I think that is really a great way to come from a space of not just knowledge, but also experience, seeing it with your own eyes. And again, it's that whole, like, how do you download that to other people? You know, and a lot of regenerative farmers have come from crisis. You know, they've had a snowstorm, they've had a fire, they've had a flood. And it normally takes that kind of catastrophic event, you know, crisis, and COVID's probably another one of those, to force change. It's like, how do we, you know, get people to see and change without that kind of catastrophic event? And I really hope that we have the foresee, you know, the ability to avoid a climate catastrophic disaster before it's too late, you know, that we don't have to, you know, see it with our own eyes, you know.
Yeah, that's right. And plus, you know, as so here in Australia especially, we have such a huge landmass that, you know, if we have such, and as a result, you know, I spoke about those different carbon sinks, right? We have such huge potential opportunity. In fact, I see it as a duty to sequester carbon for the rest of the world, because, you know, we manage this landmass. This landmass is shared across, you know, 23 million people right now, acknowledging the traditional owners of this landmass who are doing some phenomenal stuff when it came to sort of carbon management, which would be super fascinating to look at, you know, bringing back, right? But I think we have a global duty here to, you know, to really restore that land and restore the soil carbon levels to what they were, to support other nations and other entities like the European Union and the US to offset their emissions.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just on the landmass, you know, we have the whole marina, you know, our whole continent is, you know, our whole country is kind of by water mass. We have the whole ability to, you know, do marine farming, which, you know, blew my mind when I realized this, that there are other places where they're just bordered by other land. They don't have a coastline. They don't have marine wildlife. They don't have that whole other world of carbon that they can dabble in, and we do, you know.
Yep. And I think it's important to also showcase the world that this is possible, and this is to show what the outcome of these practices can be. And I think that's a huge opportunity for Australia to work on that and to show everybody, look, this is what we do, this is how we increase the carbon in the soil over time, and this is the outcome. That's a huge opportunity, and not only for the developed countries, but also for lesser developed countries in Africa and in Asia as well. So I think that's quite an amazing time here, really, to bulletproof these processes.
Love that, 100%. Such a world of opportunities. Now we could talk soil and carbon all day, but is there a final thought that you want to leave our soil lovers, listeners, with? Sam, I'll throw to you first.
Look, I'm going to sound like a broken record here. You can't manage what you don't measure, and I think measurement is key. And not just if you have if you've been doing this. So regardless of whether you haven't been doing that, you haven't been following regenerative practices, or whether or not you have, there's equal benefit to be gained from just taking some measurements and some soil testing, because, you know, for those that have been doing this for 20 years, you take these measurements and you get this, you can benchmark yourself across your region and look at where you sit relative to others, and that can be really eye-opening. Just probably no surprises for the farmers that do it, but, you know, sharing that information and then sharing your practices and having some evidence to say that, hey, this is where I sit, this is where the average is. And then likewise, for the people that are just getting into regenerative ag, take some measurements now. You know, definitely take some measurements now so that you can see the effect of these changes, because at the end of the day, it's not the measurements that are going to increase soil carbon, it's what you do. But we need to share, and it comes back to Florian's point there, you need to be able to share what you do with, you know, those around, and you need to have that transparency so that, you know, you can encourage others to do it. You know, every one of your listeners is a leader in this space, right? Or has the potential to be a leader in the space, but only through quantification and then sharing that data and talking and, you know, having some evidence to back that up, can they really be a leader in this space.
Yeah, I love that. Track and measure, and then you can manage. But one of the other things I say as well is to learn out loud, you know, do things like this. Like, no one's right or wrong. We're all just kind of flying through this planet, hacking our way through it, and doing something is better than doing nothing. And so tracking and measuring is awesome. And then that way you can manage it. And that's an awesome thing. But then share it out loud to inspire others. Florian, what is your final thought and piece of information that you want everyone to think about?
I first of all, I agree with what Sam said and what you said. So sharing is a really important part of this. And I think very important is to see the situation as an opportunity and to not always paint this, black picture of we are all doomed or it's all looks really bad. Actually, there are coming through innovation, through like small changes, really. There's so many opportunities that we can take on. And instead of saying, no, that's not possible or it doesn't work, I like the idea of, well, how does it work? And to ask the question, how can we make it work? And to take to take on the situation, to take on the challenges and create opportunities out of this. And I think this is something we can really do here with the data of the soil, with the measurement of the soil, and with sharing the story of how it can work. And this is something I really want to say here. This is really just the beginning.
I love that. Just the beginning. Well, excellent. Well, I think everyone really has to have that deep and meaningful thought and reflection. What does carbon mean to you, and what are you doing with your knowledge? And if you don't, what are you doing to dig deeper, to learn more? Sam, I want to ask the final question before we wrap up here. If you were our soils, what would you tell people above the ground? Give our soils a voice.
Okay, listen to me. That's what I'd say. I'd say listen to me. And how do you listen to soil? Well, you measure it.
Awesome. And that starts with a soil test.
Yep.
Lauren, what would you?
This is funny. I had to say similar, very much similar, the same thing. Instead of forging me to do what you want me to do, just listen to me and support me in what I'm doing best. That's what I would say. So yeah, it's very similar to what Sam said. Listen to me.
Well, soil lovers, there you have it. We need to listen to the soil. We are its voice as best as we can, but all we have is our touch, our smell, our feel, our eyes. So if you see that your soil isn't right, then listen to it. If you smell that your soil isn't right, then listen to it. If the touch of the soil isn't right, then listen to it. That's our best feedback mechanisms. We have, get the soil tests, look at the data, understand. One thing that blew my mind was that excessive amounts of stuff is bad. Sometimes people fall in this trap of going, bigger, better, faster, and more. And so they get a soil test and go, wow, look at my reading. I want to put more on it and get more. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing. Sometimes you might be a bit of a moron if you put more on. Put more is not better, So just, be mindful. Sam, how can people hang out with FarmLab more? Where can they go? What links can you share?
Yep, you can get in touch with us, Florian or I, one of the team. It's info@farmlab.com.au. You can head to www.farmlab.com.au if you want to learn more about the software and what we do in general. And we've just opened up a new product called the Soil Carbon Offset Report to help farmers understand whether entering a soil carbon project is right for them. So you can find out more about that on the website as well. Please get in touch. It'd be great to talk.
Awesome. Soil lovers, all those links will be around the show notes and also around the video if you're watching on our Soil Learning Center. Guys, it has been absolutely a pleasure chatting to you about all things soil and carbon. I really want to, gratitude to you to come and make time, because I know we're all very busy and we've got the planet to save. And I think this is the way that we can fast track that by creating the right conversations and inspiring people to ask better questions.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, Ray. Thanks for having us. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Soil lovers, make sure that you subscribe, rate the podcast, and do all the fun things that we need to do to keep sharing the secrets of the soil. I'm Regen Ray. Until next time, get outside, dig deeper in your soils, and open up your mind to the wonderful world that is beneath your feet. Well, soil lovers, that's enough secrets for one episode. I really hope that you enjoyed all the secrets shared during this conversation. But hey, let's not keep it a secret. Please share this podcast around and make sure that you like it and leave us a review, because that really helps spread the secrets of the soil. Until next time, remember, get outside, get your hands dirty, and keep digging deeper into your soils.